We got a really important and timely session tonight just because of the fever pitch that this issue has hit. The government, a couple of months ago now, initiated a national parliamentary inquiry into the issue of nuclear power. I think it's the sixth such inquiry that's occurred in various forms since the early 2000s. So this issue has been kind of flogged at various times, but we've never, I don't think, it's certainly in my time, we've ever seen the risk this high, the tempo this high, and the kind of full court press being run by the other side, being run by the government, by very significant elements of the media, and by Australia's complex of think tanks, fake grassroots astroturf organisations, influence orgs, creepy influencers, you name it. They're all into it at the moment, pushing very hard for nukes. Maybe 7 or 8 months ago, it might have felt like this was a bit of shadowboxing and a bit of misdirection from the real issues on climate change. We know that that is partly true, but also that these people are absolutely deadly serious about getting this technology built or doing whatever they have to do to smash up the progress of renewable energy in Australia and to keep the gas and coal industries on a lifeline for as long as they can. So we're at a really important part of this issue. Whether the rest of the climate movement knows it or not, nuclear has been played into the very centre, and it's put 7 communities who didn't ask for this onto the front line. So we're really proud this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are, to welcome Julie Favell, who's a community advocate. She's been part of the local community in Lithgow and is an important part of the Lithgow Community Environment Group. She's been a part of the New South Wales meetings that the government has hosted, and she spoke at the nuclear inquiry in Lithgow yesterday. Thanks heaps for joining us, Julie. She's going to be joined, shaking your head. If I've made any mistakes in your intro, please pick me up. We'll be joined by Dr. Jim Green, who's a long-term anti-nuclear campaigner who's also been following the progress of the inquiry very, very closely. And a little bit later in the evening, we'll hear from Dave Sweeney and Karina Lester, who had just returned from Baku from COP29, where they saw what's happening here in Australia playing out at the global level, a global influence campaign being run by the nuclear industry to try and sabotage the clean energy rollout. So there's a lot on our plate. So with that, we'll get started. As I say, please keep yourself on mute. Please be respectful. We're very happy to take questions a little bit later in the session, but for the time being, please welcome our speakers. Julie, take it away, and please pick me up on whatever I got wrong in my intro. Thanks so much for joining us after a big day.
Thanks, Scott. Yes, I didn't end up speaking. It was our secretary. It was a tactical reason because he's actually our secretary. He's a citizen of Lithgow. He also has been off the grid with his own business with 4 cabins and a museum for 21 years. We thought it was a very relevant point, but we also requested that the committee at the hearing yesterday to accept Lithgow Environments Group submission, which gave all the environmental issues that we are aware of and have been watching for 20 years. I have to say, it was a pretty good meeting. There was the bites, the usual bites to try and get people lure in with Ted O'Brien. He got knocked down by the chair, which was very welcoming. There was also extra people that came in that I can't fill you in too much on some of them. So I did put the link in of the hearing of who the speakers were. So there was 12 speakers altogether. There was only 2 that spoke for nuclear. The rest were all opposed. That was a really good feeling. The person's first up was Hennessy, Peter Payne, and Reg Kidds. He wasn't actually listed on the hearing until later in the day on the internet. So Peter apparently has been studying, I don't know whether you know him, Scott, Peter Payne, I think his name was, as an academic, but he's also still studying and doing another degree in nuclear. The next person was another academic, a retired barrister who was totally opposing, but he had a gripe with solar panels in farming area with starting fires. There was a good point that I was unaware of, which I'm assuming it may be true, maybe not. But his point was that he was against solar farms in the agricultural areas because of the fire hazards. And also that people can't get insurance. Farmers can't get insurance, which was another one, which was the same with anybody living close to a proposed nuclear plant. If it went ahead, you can't get insurance. Reg Kidd was an ex-mayor for Orange, which is a town, a city, probably 120 k's from here. We had 3 speakers that we had asked to help us with this inquiry. We had Thomas, as I said, Secretary for Lithgow Environment Group. We also had Central West Environmental Council, the President, Nick King, and he was representing 14 groups across the Central West. And the last person was a retired doctor, GP, Jim Blackwood from Bathurst. They all spoke incredibly well and had credible evidence to show why nuclear is not on the agenda. Within those 12, we also had 3 representatives from a local Wiradjuri group, and they also gave the cry of, you can't have a project like this without harming the land. So it ran through the meeting. Ted O'Brien did, of course, try to bait some of them with, we're going to come out for the next 2.5 years with community consultation. But I think everybody was well informed that they had read the newspaper article when we all found out by the news that this was going to happen, with him saying, well, regardless of we come out and do the community consultation, we'll veto that and we'll go ahead if it comes about. So overall, it was a really good meeting. We got probably about 40 people in the room. It wasn't very well publicised. I've had people today saying, didn't know it was on. We were just assuming that the committee, the secretary, Antonia, she was actually part of the committee. There was 2 members that were on the phone. Sorry, it was ladies. I couldn't recall their name. I'm sure others will know who have been to those meetings. And throughout the meeting, there was one lady. She was a candidate for the 2022 federal election, Labor candidate. She actually told Ted O'Brien to shut up. It just had the room in laughter.
Somebody's got to do it.
Oh yeah, she went for it. But it would, overall, the feeling from all of the speakers was, this does not fit. Yes, we know we need to move on, but this does not fit with what nuclear can do. Waste was a big thing. You can't remove the harm, and you can't remove human error. With all the good intentions and policy, it can still happen, and also you can't remove natural disasters. We're at the headwaters of the Sydney catchment, which provides water to millions of people in Sydney. This is where Mount Piper is positioned. We have put that forward in our submission, stating that if something happens, you'll be poisoning all of their water as well. So overall, yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else that anyone wants to ask questions about. It wasn't threatening. It was quite passive. It was only that one time with the Ted O'Brien over talking the chairperson, and the Sarah, the previous candidate for the 2022 elections, did say something, but it was flattened by saying, we need to respect each other, and it wasn't a closed meeting, so it went ahead. So I don't know whether there's any other questions.
Thanks so much, Julie. That's brilliant. And as a personal beneficiary of Sydney's drinking water, thank you for standing up for everybody in that catchment and for everything that you're doing for your patch as well. I gather we've only got you for another 15 minutes or so. Are you okay to stick with us for a little bit?
For a little bit, yeah. I can give you probably another 5-10, yeah.
No dramas. So I want to move on to Jim Green, but if anybody's got any questions at all for Julie, please chuck them into the chat and we'll come back to them fairly shortly. It's a delight always to introduce Jim Green to the stage. He's a national nuclear-free campaigner with Friends of the Earth Australia. He's also been a member of the Nuclear Consulting Group for some time, former editor of the Nuclear Monitor. He hates it when we do the long-form intros, so that's why I'm doing it. The newsletter published by the World Information Service on Energy, WISE, and the Nuclear Information Resource Service. Jim's been tracking this thing not just for the last couple of months, but arguably for the last 20 or 30 years. Jim, please go ahead and let us know how you think this whole thing's going.
Uh, Thanks, Scott, and thanks everyone for joining in. And respect to the Kaurna traditional owners here in the Adelaide region of South Australia. I think it's useful to have some perspective on this. I think nuclear power is more than likely to get blocked one way or another. Either the coalition loses the election, or the Senate blocks it, or the plans just fall over under the weight of their own stupidity. But what is really disturbing is that the coalition can blow up the renewable energy transition, and the coalition is already blowing up the renewable energy transition from opposition. They're already spooking investors in renewable energy projects, and from government they can do vastly more damage and will definitely do more damage. So it's not just nuclear power we need to be worried about. We need to be worried about this scenario where the coalition drastically limits the rollout of renewables and forces the owners of coal plants to prolong their operations and uses lots more gas, to use the words of Ted O'Brien. And that scenario is so dystopian from so many perspectives. It will definitely increase power bills, it will definitely increase taxes, and it will definitely increase greenhouse emissions. So the shadow energy minister is the triple threat of Australia's energy politics. Is going to increase emissions, taxes, and power bills. And he knows that. And I think that the coalition is essentially playing a political game. They hope to divide the Labor Party, which they have not done. They hope to divide the environment movement, which they have not done. And of course, they're getting complete support from the Murdoch and Sky media. But, the only thing the coalition has divided is the coalition itself. Even just going on public comments, there's a deep rift within the coalition about this nuclear power proposal. And one former Liberal Party executive described this nuclear policy as the longest suicide note in Australian political history. So for all the challenges we face, I think we need to think of ourselves as being on the front foot. We're absolutely winning this debate in many respects. And if the coalition wins the next election, it will be despite and not because of its ridiculous nuclear power policy. So the House of Reps inquiry, just a couple of brief comments. Firstly, it's disappointing that the coalition has been very proactive, whereas the Labor MPs seem to be going through the motions. So that's disappointing. But on the other hand, it's been great to see so many people put their hands up to speak at these inquiries, at these hearings. That's really important. Even more important is doing media work, having small protest actions outside, small peaceful actions, which tend to set the narrative and to get a run on TV and radio coverage of these hearings all around the country. That's super important. Inside the hearings, well, if you are speaking, expect to get harassed by Ted O'Brien, or worse still, expect to get intimidated by Ted O'Brien. So there's ways to counter that. I've been working with someone else who's with Friends of the Earth, who's on the call today, who's written an article which will hopefully be published in the next couple of days about Ted O'Brien's intimidation of witnesses. You can also write a complaint. But also inside the hearings, if you are speaking, well, how rarely do we get the opportunity to speak truth to power? Tell these people what you think of them, and tell them how ridiculous their nuclear power policy is and how it doesn't stack up whatsoever, and how getting their faces on Sky Media doesn't mean that it's actually a good energy policy. So I think just a few concluding comments. 3 months to the election or 5 months to the election, I think we're already feeling tired now, and we'll all have a break over Christmas, but we need to be prepared for some months of very hard work, and then we can all collapse after the election And I can't even stress how important this is, because if the coalition wins, they do destroy the renewable energy transition, and they do implement this dystopian scenario that I've been pointing out, where nuclear power is just one thread of the problems. It's expansion of fossil fuels blowing up the renewable energy transition, and so on and so forth. So I would encourage everyone to think of the ways that you can contribute, whether that's as a member of an environment group or any way you possibly can. It might be persuading your neighbour to rethink his or her support for nuclear power. Writing letters to the newspapers, letters to the editor is super important. If you've never done that before and you would like to try, well, send me an email and we'll put my email address in the chat, and I'll be very happy to send you a 1 or 2 page information sheet on how to write letters to the editor. Better still, talkback radio. It would be great to have more critical voices on talkback radio, and if that sounds nerve-wracking, and it probably does, well, you know, you don't even have to give your real name. Just give yourself an alias and start ringing up talkback radio and giving them heaps. It can be really fun, actually. I had a talk on 3AW with a shock jock the other day, and it was hilarious. And once again, if you want to know how to do talkback radio, well, send me an email and I'll send you a 2-page briefing paper. And finally, unrelated to everything else I've said, is that tomorrow it's highly likely that there will be the release of the government's final economics report, and it will be complete bullshit, and they will be heavily promoting the AP1000 reactors, which is so weird. I mean, the experience with the AP1000 reactors in the United States is that they've only pursued 2 projects. One in South Carolina was abandoned after 13 billion Australian dollars was wasted on the project. The second project was in Georgia, in the US state of Georgia, and it was completed, but the final cost was 10 times greater than the initial estimate. It worked out at somewhere between 25 to 30 billion Australian dollars per reactor. It was 6 to 7 years behind schedule, and if the coalition thinks that's a good bet for Australia, well, it's just crazy. So that's what they're promising. They're promising projects which will be incredibly expensive, could not even begin to contribute to greenhouse emissions reductions in Australia before the middle of the century, and make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I'll leave it there, Scott.
Thanks heaps, Jim. I think one of the things that we like to see if they do finally announce their costings, in inverted commas, is they're going to be lowballing the price and saying that it's cheaper than renewable energy. Do you have a sense of how they're going to get away with fudging those numbers? Should we avoid that level of detail? Like how are they going to try and carry off that argument, do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say they close it. They pursue their arguments with obfuscation. So they say that countries with a balanced mix of energy sources, including nuclear, typically have lower electricity prices than other countries. But, you know, how do we respond to that? I mean, it is a lie for starters, but how many people know that it's that it is a lie and have the relevant data to hand? What I tend to do is, well, 2 things. Firstly, point out that in the US, the costs were 10 times greater than the initial estimates, and landed at somewhere between 25 to 30 billion dollars per reactor. Not to mention the project that was cancelled in South Carolina, not to mention the fact that Westinghouse declared bankruptcy as a direct result of these disastrous projects, or the United Kingdom, where they said they could build a reactor for 4 billion Australian dollars, and the latest estimate is $45 billion per reactor. I can't even believe I'm saying it. $45 billion per reactor. So if you made the heroic, absurd assumption that Australia could do as well as the UK, despite all their experience and expertise, it's $45 billion per reactor. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I feel like those are killer cut-through lines that avoid all the obfuscation. And secondly is just refer to the gen cost reports produced by the CSIRO and make it very clear that Australia's leading scientific agency, the CSIRO, has said that nuclear power does not stack up economically and could not make a meaningful contribution to greenhouse emissions reductions before the middle of the century. So it's an appeal to their expertise and quite deserved too, because they are doing the best research.
Brilliant. Thanks heaps, Jim. And I think for tomorrow, if you are bamboozled by the figures, which is obviously their intention if they do announce their costings, keep an eye on a newswire called Renew Economy. There are some really good analysts working for them, and they will go through Dutton's costings with a fine-tooth comb and see if they can figure out how they've fudged the numbers, which we know that's what they're going to attempt to do. All right, we've got two. We're going to shift from the local to the global now, although I suspect both of our speakers have a very strong local dimension to their comments. Dave Sweeney has been active in mining, resources and nuclear issues for 4 decades through his work with media, trade unions and enviro groups. He presently leads the Australian Conservation Foundation's Nuclear Free campaign. He's a co-founder of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which means we are introducing this evening's first Nobel Peace Prize winner to the stage. Welcome, Dave. You've just returned from COP29 in Azerbaijan, quite a journey from Melbourne. And then we're going to be welcoming Karina Lester to the mic. But Dave, if you'd like to lead off, you've just seen the nuclear industry's global ambitions up close. What did it leave you with?
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott. Very generous introduction. Hey, maybe a quick local observation before we helicopter up to global, and just a shout out to everyone who's participated in and done submissions and attended this federal nuclear inquiry. I was in Lithgow and saw Julie and the crew up there yesterday, and was in Sydney today. And I just want people to know that in Sydney today, a really significant set of actors and voices, from the ACTU to the Climate Council to Simon Holmes à Court to Solutions for Climate and some of the leading state and local environment organisations, to Saul Griffith, Electrify Everything, all spoke and all made it very clear that nuclear is not a credible or effective climate response or the pathway for Australia. So it's really important. I was reflecting today that I've rarely, if ever, been involved in a campaign where deep capital and deep critics of capital are all aligned on the one point of this idea is stupid and a distraction and we shouldn't go there. Now, as we all know, and as Jim's just said, we're living in strange times. You don't have to look too far to see that often adjectives, enthusiasm, misinformation, disinformation literally trumps like evidence and good decision-making and policy and fundamental values. So it's really imperative that we, to the extent that we can, and to the point that in the ways that we can, in the networks that we can, that we raise and state and restate the obvious, that this is that nuclear is an absolute distraction on effective climate action. It would perpetuate fossil fuels. It would extend coal, cement gas, and it's really, in a country that's already 40% renewable, really not the way forward. Tony Webb, quickly, yes, your excellent work on raising the concerns about radiation health and exposure levels, and that very powerfully made today by the ACTU. You'll be pleased to hear. Okay, so from Sydney, jump across the water to Baku, where myself and Karina Lester we went as, if you like, representatives of the Australian Nuclear Free movement to COP29. Largely we went because for the last few years, there's been a literal conga line of Australian Conservative politicians who have used COP as an event to promote domestic nuclear power and to send social media back, to do lots of stuff with, particularly with their favourite media outlets like the Australian, the Murdoch Press, Sky News and the like, and to basically use this to talk up nuclear power. We were of the view, both Karina from a First Nations lived experience of fighting waste dumps, second generation nuclear test survivor, and me from a long time in the trade from working with communities and working with ACF and a range of other civil society groups. We really wanted to be on the ground to put forward the view that Australia doesn't want, doesn't need, isn't going to go down the path of nuclear, and to show contest. So that was the rationale. We didn't really go to COP to influence policy or to directly affect texts and resolutions and the like. We went more with a theme that was about building relationships, building connections, building profile of the issue, and influencing the narrative. And it was actually really important and really good to have that sort of clarity about your role. This is the first time I've been to a climate COP. I've been to quite a few different sort of international fora, but this was the first time in the climate COP, and it's a pretty strange and pretty unique sort of beast. I described it to someone as like trying to go to the toilet, a combination between high-level politics and trying to go to the toilet at halftime on the grand final. There's 35,000 people in a convention centre surging around, different directions, different paces, different agendas, different ambitions, different egos. Extraordinary. And it would be very easy if you didn't have a clear sense of purpose, focus, or your compass, to just be a little bit overwhelmed by this sort of surge of events and side events and meetings and breakout meetings and media events, etc., etc. So myself and Karina were fortunate that we plugged into and worked really closely with our allies in a loose coalition of Don't Nuke the Climate International. So over the course of 2 weeks, and I tell you that's a long time of getting up and pulling on the boots every day, 6 days a week, over the course of that 2 weeks, there probably would have been about 18 or 20 people who joined and worked in that coalition. And there were people from North America, from widely through Africa, from East and West Europe, from Australia, from the Pacific, from Asia in particular, that joined, and really good representation of affected peoples, First Nations, civil society groups, academic experts, really good gender and cultural diversity and representation, and a really good, the group for an organic initiative pretty quickly found, a good groove and a good rhythm and a good way of working. We would get together each morning, analyse the day ahead, and map out events and map out coverage. So some of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to cover and track pro-nuclear events. And they were in 3 sort of camps. One was, if you like, colour and movement pro-nuclear events, pro-nuclear stunts and profile stuff from a couple of groups like Generation Atomic and Nuclear for Climate and a couple of others. Another thing we wanted to do was track, and to the extent that people felt comfortable or competent with, engage with the more institutional nuclear actors. One of them was the World Nuclear Association, the premier advocacy body for the industry, which is made up of the national peak bodies of, the American Nuclear Association, the UK this, the, French that. And they held a range of events, and we would attend those events, track what was being said, capture the tone of those events. If people, like I say, felt confident and they were okay with that, would engage, not like in a shut it down, super disruptive way, but ask some hard questions or just make a sort of statement of opposition that not all the world shares your view. And then the other big institutional player was the International Atomic Energy Agency, which had a whole range of events too. So we would divvy up you know, the colour and movement nuclear events, the industry nuclear events, and the IAEA nuclear events, to have people document them and track them. We did 3 approved, what they term actions, which is like a, they can be noisy, they can be quiet. It depends where and when and how many people, but like it's an approved, designated, you can hold banners, you can have a chant sort of events. We did 3 dedicated actions. We participated also in numerous other actions, particularly ones that had a justice or a human or a rights-based lens around the, you know, extractives are hurting community and country, and they're not solving, they're exacerbating and worsening the climate crisis. We did 2 set-piece media conferences. We did lots of separate media interviews. Karina did a cracker on Democracy Now! And lots of other stuff. We launched 2 really important pieces of work. One was a new report by ICAN Australia looking at climate change and chaos and nuclear weapons, and how each exacerbates the threat and the risk and the likelihood of the other. And Karina launched that at a significant international media event. I launched one which was an initiative that many people in this call and in the wider movement were involved in before we went, which was a civil society statement, an Australian civil society statement, basically outlining a line in the sand. We are unequivocally opposed to going nuclear in Australia, and calling for a future that was renewable, not radioactive. And that was signed by over 30 civil society groups, including groups like some heavy hitters like the ACTU, all the lead environment organisations, major faith groups, major women's, peace and Indigenous groups, and representing collectively millions of Australians. So to be able to table that, to be able to present that, to be able to speak to that at some of these industry forums was great. We gave away heaps of stickers and campaign, you know, agitprop and materials and all that sort of stuff. We wore T-shirts and badged up, you know, so we were very visible and had a visible presence. We got an important article on nuclear financing and how it's drawing away from real solutions in the well-read daily eco newsletter. We had lots of targeted meetings with strategic groups. We did a lot of different sort of activities. It was a busy time. We did a Zoom briefing with Don't Nuke the Climate, a briefing from Baku while we were there. And it was basically like a really good, busy and positive time to be there. A couple of just quick reflections before I hand it over to Karina for her observations. But one is that in relation to the colour and movement, pro-nuke, anti-nuke, was basically a nil-all draw. They did plenty, we did plenty, nil-all draw, playing away from home. That's not a bad result. In relation to the institutional nuclear stuff, very interesting. As you could imagine, the World Nuclear Association and their national affiliates flash a lot of swagger, a lot of sort of chutzpah, but touch the surface a bit. And particularly when you started to turn up routinely to their meetings and have chats afterwards, and I would front many of their panels, introduce who I was, say that I was opposed to nuclear, but I'm interested to speak with them or to learn from their experience, because we're in a country now that's having this debate, and interested to hear, you know, the experience of your country or the experience of your industry, or what do you say to people who have a criticism of this? And some people were like, shut us right up, you know, go away. Other people were like, I love talking about this stuff. Long conversations, quite insightful, quite open, surprisingly open in some cases, particularly in countries that didn't feel threatened. You know, we're part of the landscape. We have been for 40 years. Here's what works, here's what hasn't, here's the problems we've faced. So there's been some interesting conversations there, but the take-home message was that underneath the chutzpah was a real sense of frustration. Like from their perspective, we have not advanced. We've got new adjectives, we've got new promises, we've got some slick new material. We are not getting their big phrase, steel in the ground. We are not putting electrons into the wires. And so that was really interesting. Though there was a high level of frustration at the industry's stalled performance. The other observation I'd make about the international one was perhaps a little bit more disturbing. It was quite heartening to see these nuclear industry people being frustrated and gnashing their teeth about their underperformance. But less heartening was the International Atomic Energy Agency under their Director General Grossi, a very polished Argentinian former head of the Argentine National Nuclear Agency. They had quite a considered and quite an assertive approach to talk all things nuclear, very visible presence, but not so much nuclear power. More like they would do a joint thing with the Food and Agriculture Organisation about food security and nuclear's role, a joint thing with the World Meteorological Organisation about nuclear's role in predicting weather and how important that is in a climate unstable world, a joint thing with the World Health Organisation about nuclear's role in health outcomes. Anything but power, really. And it seemed to me to be very much a part of a very deliberate strategy to literally universalise nuclear amongst the UN agencies, so that nuclear wasn't a silo over here that's a little bit creepy or a little bit weird or attracts some heat, but it's an everyday part of life. And they were explicitly linking nuclear to each of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the underpinning framework of UN agencies. So that is hard to counter, but good to know about and good to watch and to think about our next steps in relation to that. In relation to next steps and pulling out from the nukes to the bigger thing of COP, the observation from having gone to COP is that it's not fit for purpose. It doesn't have the appetite, the capacity, it doesn't have the urgency to deal with the climate crisis that we all know. It's over-dominated by the fossil fuels. It was chaired by Azerbaijan, which is a fossil fuel state. It is, if the only thing that was addressing climate change in the world was COP, then it would be time to start drinking heavily and early in the day. But it's not, because there is community action, there is individual national actions, there is regional actions, there's local governments, there's people putting solar on their roof. There's 1,000 things from big to small, as well as many other international instruments that are happening, as well as the movement of private capital that's happening, lots of good things. But it's not cutting through in that big international agreement level. And that's because structurally, if you want to block, you can block. And the Saudis and a bunch of others were just like, we are blocking. That's that. See you next year. And I think it's really going to be a challenge for COP. Next year it's in Brazil, and it's a real key opportunity because Brazil wants to put First Nations voices first and human impacts first. They want to have thousands of people from Amazonia, highly threatened, at the COP, registered, talking. They want to have thousands of First Nations people from around the world telling their stories. And I think that'll be really important, and particularly important if Australia gets it the year after. That's probably a good time to hand over to Karina, just with the observation that, like some of the key Indigenous and First Nations groups, in particular, big shout out to the effort of Get Up, who facilitated a really strong and powerful group of predominantly First Nation women going to tell their story about the impact of extractives, from Karina through to nuclear, through to people about fracking, but that common link of respect for the past, protection of the present, and preservation of and continuation into the future was so powerful. And like, I reckon that there's no question they'll be doing more of that to come. And before I do, might embarrass her, but Karina was fantastic, like just a powerful advocate, up for every challenge, flexible, fiery, clear, gutsy, and a delight. And also, just for me personally, like juggling 15 things and going, God, is this a good use of time? And I'm missing my mob and this and that. To have such a good comrade there, was just cement. So on that note, Karina, I'll hand pass to Scott to hand pass to you.
My introduction of dear Karina isn't going to be as good as that. That was great. But we have travelled as comrades on Peace Boat before, and I know from first-hand experience that if you've got Karina on your side, you're probably on the winning side. Karina Lester is a Yankunytjatjara Anangu woman who grew up on the APY lands in South Australia. Her father, the late elder Yami Lester, was blinded by the black mist fallout from the Totem 1 nuclear test at Emu Field in 1953, And since then, the Lester family has really been a backbone of nuclear resistance across the country, and have spoken around the world for decades. Karina presently works at the Uni of Adelaide's mobile language team as the Aboriginal co-manager and language worker, co-hosting the Nanyampa Wonka radio show, apologies for the mangled pronunciation, on Radio Adelaide about South Australian Aboriginal languages, and has also just returned from Baku. Thanks so much for joining us, Karina. Please take it away.
Thank you, Uncle Scott. So lovely to see everybody, and also Dave for your kind words as well. I have to say I did travel over there with blinkers on, but as soon as I hit the ground running with Dave, those blinkers certainly came off, and it was an amazing experience for myself to actually be able to raise some of these really tricky conversations and to raise the voices of Indigenous, and in my case, my animal story, to a big conference like COP29, to just speak up strong about the impacts nuclear has had on Indigenous peoples. And that was certainly something that we networked when we were there, Dave and I, connecting with everybody else. And Dave's right in saying that we had only first time met many people. I hadn't known many of the anti-nukers that were there at that particular event. So I think we gelled nicely, which was really wonderful for me because of, you know, the story being so sensitive and so close to my heart. To have that support around me at that time so far away was really important for me to be able to do the work then, and to get out there and to network, and also be able to attend some of those press conferences as well, and to launch a couple of things as well. So, you know, we certainly had each other's back during that time, to really get out the message from Australia, and also that opposition, you know, of the coalition's recent announcement around nuclear power, and, you know, going out there to find out more about the nuke story, but then also going out there to say, hey, these are the reasons why we clearly say no as Indigenous peoples of Australia, and, you know, our story as well, and just remind people of the long decades of the struggle that we've all been through as well. Really excited that time when we did get the news of the big fight over there in Jabiluka and up there in Kakadu, and really grateful that I was able to, you know, bring that to the world's attention of what happened, and the success of that story. But again, reinforcing the many, many decades of that struggle there, in Ranger Mine, and all of the Mirror mob and everyone that was involved in that whole journey as well. And I think it was really important for us to be able to say something in spaces like a press conference in Baku at COP29, was really important. And it was quite moving for me, because it's been such a personal story, and that whole journey with everybody and the struggles that we go through as Aboriginal people. But, you know, that network is really important for us as well. And, you know, network within the anti-nuke crew, being able to support one another and talk about the real struggles that we are having in our communities, and to hear about the mining, and to hear about the, you know, waste dumps, and of course nuclear power, but also the fact that the pro-nukers did get airtime over there as well, for us to be able to try and work and learn, because I certainly wanted to try and understand where they were coming from as well, but then also reassuring myself that my story and our journey, our Aboriginal story, is really strong in this conversation in anti-nuke work. So that was really wonderful for me to have that experience. I kind of went in with two hats, and I do want to shout out to both ACF, Australian Conservation Foundation, for allowing me to go in on their accreditation as well and be part of this, but then also to get some of that amazing support from Get Up crew as well, who were quite supportive of the work that I was doing, and the fact that I kind of moved between the two as well. So I spread myself over to the Get Up and network with these amazing women who are leaders within their own communities, and join Connects and join Dots, because I'd never met those ladies before, and I was quite excited. But just, you know, really humbled at the same time as well to hear their stories and to, you know, hear about their struggles and their fights over there as, you know, Aboriginal women and from young women to elders within the communities with Auntie Polly, and to really network with them because, like I said, I hadn't met them before. So I was really grateful for that opportunity and felt that there was the support of my mob, the mobs from Australia, who were there on the same kind of journey to really talk up about climate change and, you know, the impacts and First Nations voices. And they had done some amazing work over there, certainly networking with the Brazilian crew and to really get the conversation around lifting First Nations voices in COP30. So that was something Get Up was really closely connected to really build that relationship with them and to get some strategic thinking around how do we make COP30 the COP for Indigenous voices. And that was really powerful for them and for us who were partly involved in some of those conversations. And then, of course, you know, me being able to move between the anti-nuke work and, you know, Indigenous women's in leadership again, you know, around climate change, which is really powerful. I certainly had no idea, no expectations when I walked in. So it was a bit in my face, which was great in that I realized that big forums like this, climate change conference and UN and COP and many people from around the globe, but it really gave me some insight into how crazy the world is that we live in, but the role that we play back home. One of the things that I sort of took from COP29 was the fact that I really wanted to come home and sort of focus locally as well in my country and my community and my people. And for me to sort of strategically think on how we need to raise and speak up strongly around climate change at that local level. And I think some of the other Aboriginal women were also thinking about, you know, it's such a crazy world. How do we just focus on nurturing and supporting ourselves through this whole climate change? But what's the role that we can play with our communities as well? And, you know, how do we lift our voices in those conversations? You know, conversations like renewable energy, what's our role as Indigenous peoples? And I sort of raised a question in one of the Australian Pavilion discussions around renewables, about what if we are moving, making sure that we don't leave anyone behind and making sure we don't leave, you know, in my community, Anangu behind, because I raised a question in one of those panel discussions that South Australia is on this journey of transitioning to renewables, and our Premier did make his effort to get across there to Baku, Peter Malinauskas, and he made a comment in that pavilion that we're heading to 100% renewables by 2027, but they have left behind a group of Anangu, and that's my community on the APY lands. And the concern that I have is that we're not part of those conversations, and why, which is the reason why I kind of thought, well, how do I focus back to my community as well? And to get us sitting around those tables and to have those conversations around renewables as we transition, and how do we start to get solar panels on our roofs in our remote communities, and what is the role that we can play, because land, you know, is what we have. What can we do to be involved in a renewables transition, and is there space for us to, you know, put solar farms out on our traditional lands? And same with Yankunytjatjara mob, and, you know, big areas of land under our Land Rights Act that could potentially be solutions to the renewable transition as well. So it took me from going over there to come back to home and to really work locally, but then also raising it today. In the last 2 days, I've had language meetings, and I put it on the table in that space and in that forum as well about the role of languages within the climate change discussion. and supporting Torres Strait Islander representatives that sit around that table on the Languages Policy Partnership, but also our role as an island within the Pacific region as well. And the discussions of if Australia does pull off COP31, then we need to be supporting our Pacific brothers and sisters as well. And we need to stand together, and we need to hear stories in language, but we also need to get those stories out to the broader community as well. And so it was such an amazing experience, overwhelming, but a wonderful time to spend it with Dave and with the rest of the Anti-Nuke crew, and to really build that network and strength and get that strength from that crew, but then also from my sisters who were part of this event through the Get Up, and our Indigenous voices supporting one another and lifting each other, and really getting us to think about how do we lift Indigenous voices. If Australia gets COP31, then we want to be part of that, and we want to kind of lead some of those discussions and lead parts of that forum as well, which is really important. So amazing experience, and really grateful for the opportunity, and thank you to ACF and to Get Up for allowing me to be part of a great little team that we gelled, and we were able to talk about some of the really tricky things, and the heartfelt conversations that I was having, and sharing my stories and stuff like that, but also knowing that the support and the strength was around me to be able to talk up about why we say no. And we've always said no from day, ever since that first atomic nuclear test that took place that shook Dad's community, and black mist rolling over his community on the 15th of October 1953. So 71 years, and that was all captured in my time over there in COP, where I was able to get that journey and the struggles and that fight within my mob and the broader community as well, First Nations community here in Australia. And the fact that we do need to stand together in solidarity, and that we value and appreciate the support from organisations like ANFA and ACF and Get Up and others. ICANN as well is a huge part of really reassuring us that those that are in the front line and speaking up about really heartfelt impacts of nuclear, that the support is there for us to be able to get it out, and know that we can have, people behind us that can just allow for us to have a shoulder to cry on, or, be able to release some of the frustration and support as well. So I felt very honoured when David did ask me for all of, to be part of this and all that support. So thank you again for that amazing opportunity to be over there for COP29. It was certainly a blast and a overwhelming experience as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Karina. That's a absolutely brilliant feedback. Thank you for taking the trip as well on behalf of your mob, but also on behalf of all of us. It sounds from what you've said and what Dave said, like that in some ways was actually quite arduous. So thanks for taking the time to be there and just hit the ground on day one. I'd love to finish this up at the top of the hour because everybody's busy and got a lot going on. But I just wanted to thank all of our speakers and everybody who's put effort into bringing us together tonight. Sana for all the work behind the scenes. Karina, Dave and Jim for bringing your expertise to bear on this tough issue. I'm going to let Dave take us out. I just wanted to quickly acknowledge Pinar. I think maybe Philip has left the call, but Pinar from Turkey, thank you for joining us. I think this conversation about COP has been a great reminder that the industry is global. So is our movement for 4 generations now, and it has to stay that way if we're to prevail. And I think maybe in 2025, as we bring this one into the 4th quarter, to push Dave's metaphor a little bit, we are going to be bringing voices in from around the world just to remind us that we're all in this fight together. We don't have nuclear power in this country yet, nor will we ever if we are able to prevail, but we do provide a huge proportion of the world's uranium, creating problems for people all over the world, including in this country where I'm sitting at the moment, in Japan, where uranium from Australian uranium mines was in all 3 of the reactors that had sequential hydrogen explosions in 2011. So we're a part of this fight wherever we are in the world. So please, if you're not on our mailing list, just please throw your email in the chat before we wrap up so that we can stay in touch. The recording of this call is going to be up early next week. And if you didn't RSVP, just throw us your email so that we can stay in touch with you. The website where we're putting kind of tracking the campaign, keeping track of the news, including tomorrow where there's going to be a fair bit of news. I've just thrown that into the chat as well. We've got leaflets, we've got postcards, we've got core flutes, we've got websites, and we've got thousands of amazing people working all over the country in various groups, in the big cities, in the small towns, on the front lines, and out on country. And we will prevail. We kind of have no choice. We've always had our backs up against the wall. We've got nowhere else to go. This is home, and so we have to fight to protect it. We'll see you at the next one. Take a bit of a rest. Take a little bit of a break if you're able, and when you're able, over the December break, so that we can come back early next year and really give them what for. Dave, would you like to take us out?
I reckon that is a fantastic wrap up there, and I'd just echo some of what Scott said. And the other thing here, it's amazing. We've got Pinar in Turkey, we've got Scott in Japan, we've got from Penrith to Perth, and from Lithgow to Launceston on this call. It's fantastic. It's a great movement. And one thing the whole COP experience has really elevated for me is the similarity in the stories, in the mode of operandi for the industry, and the mode of resistance for the communities. And our shared stories and our shared solidarity and shared strategy is our strength. And, I Don't Nuke the Climate and ANFA and a whole range of other initiatives that we have really build that. Like Scott said, this is a really elevated key time. We've got an election inside 5 months, and this is a key issue. So we really need to be, as again, what Scott said, anti-nuclear activists up until that election time. We need to make sure that this doesn't get the traction and become a continuing distraction and a continuing waste of every sort of resource, including human energy and financial capital. Please, even if you don't think you know enough, you know heaps. Modest initiatives, letters to papers, conversations with friends, those things really matter. There's core flutes available from ACF. We would love to have them on houses, in front yards and all that sort of stuff. There's a 7-region petition and an ACF petition. And over the next couple of days, details on the core flutes, those petitions and that will be on the Don't Nuke the Climate website. Really urge you to keep an eye on that over the summer. If you could write a letter to the local paper about the costings and saying, well, where's the costing for long-lived radioactive waste? One other sneak thing that Karina didn't mention is she featured in a BBC documentary that was launched over in the UK when we were in Baku, and it's on Britain's secret, dirty nuclear testing story, but it also includes the First Nations story. And we want to try and get some pressure on ABC to pick that up and screen that next year. So that might be a particular project. There's lots of things for next year. There's lots of importance. We really want to put also really strengthen and buttress the TEALs, because they might be in a really important political position. They already are, but they may be in a bigger one. And we really need to reinforce that nuclear is not effective climate action. But the final thing I'd just like to say is thanks for a great year of effort, work, effectiveness, and comradeship. And as Scott said, a little bit of self-care, like Karina said, is really important. Take a bit of time, heal up a bit, recharge, because we are going to hit the ground running in season 25. So on that note, wish everyone, a summer and a end of the year and a start of the new year that is as peaceful and gentle or rowdy and raucous as you would like. And see you on the other side for an important fight that we can, we must, and we will win. See ya.